Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. again. Folks, the Middle East is on fire, and it's looking like it might even get worse. And we have a real potential, if we don't really thread the needle and take care of ourselves very carefully, we could stumble into a war almost no matter which way we go. We've got a lot of options of things that we can do, ways we can make it worse, possibly a few ways we can make it better. We're going to talk about that. And we have a really good person to talk to today. You saw him last week, Jason Beardsley, who is the Director of Veterans Initiatives at Stand Together and is a former advisor to the Secretary of Defense under the Trump administration. And man, are we looking forward to talking to you today, because we want to see, we need to get some of that good advice that got you up to that position, because man, does our country need some good advice today.
Oh, Danny, it's an honor to be here. And what's amazing is you always get these really wonderful softball topics. How do we solve the Middle East? So
Right.
very excited.
We want to kind of ease you into all this. So let's get some easy ones.
Right. No, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And obviously, as you said, we've gotten ourselves into quite a conundrum. And what's happening in the Middle East today, is exacerbated by really a long bit of bad foreign policy that really puts us in harm's way frequently. And we end up with not a lot of good solutions in front of us, which is why you see this tension between, the desire to kind of do something efficacious or something that is very prolific versus pull back and not do anything, which is just as embarrassing. And so we're really caught between these very difficult situations. So happy to talk about it, but again, certainly not the easiest topic to roll up.
Yeah, and that's a perfect tee up here. And we're actually going to show a couple of clips here that just kind of illustrates just how big this conundrum is. Because here's let me kind of paint the picture a little bit here first for our audience. Of course, we've had issues here in just the last couple of weeks where we have had terrorist attacks in Iran, where they had a bunch of people killed here. We've had Israel launching assassination moves into Lebanon, into Syria against Iranian targets. The U.S. into Iraq, in Baghdad of all places, against some Iran-backed leaders that were actually part of the Iraqi government, which has caused a lot of problems there. We have the issue in the Red Sea, where even our own American flag ships, some of which have been attacked by Houthi rebels. We've now attacked multiple times against the Houthis in Yemen. They're vowing revenge. Everybody who gets hit is vowing revenge. By the way, there's that little thing of the big war that's going on between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And now that you have Iran jumping into the fray here, and they're attacking even into Pakistan, because it's almost like the prohibitions or the restrictions or the concerns about taking military action are just being shed left and right. And everybody's thinking, well, it's a free-for-all. Let's keep going. Into that volatile mixture, you have the U.S. trying to take care of its responsibilities to try to prevent things from going bigger. And man, do we have some real problems. Now, there are those in America, this no surprise at all here, who are saying we need to go in heavy-handed, we need to hit them, punch them hard, and we need to teach those guys a lesson. One of which is a former general officer, General Wes Clark, who says, you know what, we need escalation dominance.
I would hope that we would try to achieve escalation dominance over the Houthis. If they fire one missile, we take out 3 targets. If they fire 3 missiles, we take out 6 targets. In other words, we try to stay away from a tit for tat. And ultimately, if we can't take out the assets they're using to strike these ships, then we've got to go to find assets they value more highly.
Jack Keane, on the other hand, no surprise here, he's saying, man, we need to punch them and punch them hard.
Until you take Iran on directly and change our policy dealing with Iran, which has been more appeasement and diplomatic overture than anything else, and willing to confront them and have them pay a price with kinetic operations, not start a war with Iran, but take away some of their capabilities like we're doing with the Houthi proxies, then you'll start to see a tone down in some of these aggressive activities by the proxies.
Now, we're going to look in just a second at the other side of that, possibility of maybe we should use more diplomacy and should not hit them as hard. and look at the pros and cons of that one. But first, Jason, let's look at this one. Now, you've been in a position to advise secretaries of defense on various issues during your time when you were working in the government. If you're advising the Secretary of Defense today to say, hey, here's with all of this chaos I just talked about that exists, and we'll talk in a second about how we got there, but we are there right now. And so there is no easy answer here, but there has to be an answer because we can't do nothing. We have to do something. So what are our options here?
Yeah, this is very complex because you're right. For the Department of Defense, the options are super limited. We have the response that comes in the form of violent action, direct action. The problem with direct action is that it's done. If it's done in a limited way, it has a very temporary sort of effect. And so, whether it's a bomb strike, an air raid, or a raid of personnel on targets, those things are only really effective when they're nested within what is essentially a grand strategy. The grand strategy is how the big thinkers, the politicians, the paid civilians think through what is America's purpose, disposition. How should we apply our energies and our effects in the Middle East? And because we don't have a very clear grand strategy, we haven't really for a long time, it's very difficult for the Department of Defense, the secretary, to say, well, here's how my solution actually works to coordinate with your solution, Mr. President. And because the president hasn't really created or crafted that narrative, we're stuck in a hard place. So the DoD is limited to its effects. We can lob missiles, we can do strikes, but they're just not going to affect the long-term campaign.
Well, and I guess even more fundamentally before you can even suggest anything to the Secretary of Defense or he to the president has to say, here's the outcome I want to achieve. This is what I want the end state to look like so that the Defense Department can say, all right, well, based on that, here is the means that we can use to get that. And here are the pros and cons or the possibility of effective moves here or effective moves there, and all this kind of stuff. If you don't have that first outcome vision, if you don't even know what you're trying to accomplish, anything you do could either be ineffectual or actually make it worse, don't you think?
Boy, that is really it in a nutshell. And I think people can think about this state craft, this foreign policy, like a spider web, where every string kind of affects, when you tug on one, it affects the other. And at the end of those strings are anchors, big anchors, like near peer rivals like Russia, China, Iran. So what you outlaid was how the Iranian influence through Hezbollah, whether it's in Israel or Lebanon or in Pakistan, as you said, or the Houthis in Yemen firing on our ships, every one of those is in its own nature tied into regional and trans-regional conflicts. So the war in Ukraine and how Russia has sort of negotiated or dealt with Iran and what they see as a best interest of Russia, not the United States. What China is doing, best interests of China, trades and shipping in the Red Sea. And both of them have a little bit more, let's call it oomph or proxy leverage when it comes to the relationship with Tehran. And we estimate, of course, that Tehran is influencing the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and they are purporting that this is in solidarity with the Palestinian cause right now that is, at war with Israel, when in fact these are always more than just one cause. These are about nations competing with nations. And the way that it's happening now in the Middle East is a lot of the nations that do not like the objectives of the U.S. are using their proxies to stir up violence and create for us what is
That's
a very
such a great point.
very chaotic position. So it's very tricky, and really the way out is leadership. And I don't mean to be very
So you need to
suspect.
finish that sentence there. But now, okay, so interesting that you put it in quite that context, because we have a clip we're going to play here from General Hodges, who ironically has a similar view on some of that, but his I guess his prescription, I don't think is going to be successful. And I want to show you what he said, and you'll see the similarities. And then I want you to talk a little bit about, is he right, and can this path actually lead to success? Now, just as a setup here, he was talking about something that the British secretary said the other day about what the West needs to do, and whether it's attacking Western, the Red Sea shipping, protecting the Red Sea shipping, and attacking the Houthis, or some of these other things. But here's what Hodges said about what we should do and how things tie together.
I was impressed actually with what your defense secretary said. What's happening with the Russia's attack against Ukraine, the Hamas attack against Israel, what North Korea is doing, China, these are all connected. And our problem over the past few years is that we have failed to think strategically and connect all of these different threats. If we thought strategically, we'd be getting better organized in terms of our defense industry, of working together with allies to protect all of the strategic interests we have. Instead, we have been reluctant to call things out.
Now, when he says call things out, knowing Hodges and things he said elsewhere, he means like missiles and shooting people and blowing stuff up. It doesn't seem to be doing anything about diplomacy. He does talk about the connection, but is his prescription right that just means we need to hit everybody harder?
Oh, well, let's divide it into two, as you did. I think that's a really great setup to say there are two things here. The first is, how do we get into a position to make meaningful action, which is what he and I discussed, connecting everything, understanding the grand strategy. That positions us to then be able to use the tools at our disposal. He's saying, let's go to the hammer. Let's go to the hammer. What a lot of people would suggest is we've seen that play before, and long-term consequences of using the hammer are not as effectual in changing the diplomacy angle much on the ground. And we can witness that in Afghanistan. We can witness that in Iraq. It also challenges the premise because those are big, broad statements. The broad statement somehow that we would attack the assets of the Houthis to the point that they don't have those assets in order to harass us. But I've been on the ground. We're in the combat role. You and I are both combat soldiers. When you actually talk about eradicating a subnational force, in other words, someone that is not in armed uniform, you're talking about guerrilla warfare. You're talking about strategies we have not done well in Vietnam. Maybe the military did well, but politically we didn't. We didn't do them well in Iraq. We sat in Baghdad for 20 years. We sat in Kabul for 20 years. Both of those were posed up against the similar type of elements, guerrilla insurgents that do not have a nation state that you can bend at the knee the way we did at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the problem with their premise is that if you use something that is below the threshold of all-out conquest, which is all-out war, you're unlikely to get a settlement. So understanding the General Hodges is instinctively, yes, it can work if you have this big stick to smack them with. But when you talk about the big stick, you've got to be clear with the American people what you're actually saying. And if you're not saying a total all-out war for domination, and you have a party on the other side that can capitulate, then all you're doing is talking about another 20 years of failed counterinsurgency, which does not work against non-nation states. So that's the challenge to his thinking.
Yeah, and then when you add in the presence of a nation state like Iran, then you have some bigger problems. Now, I think that you have so tremendously encapsulated the context here that it's not just the Houthis firing on the ships in the Red Sea. It's not even just in support of the Palestinian cause in there, but it's also the Russia-Ukraine situation. It's China in the area, and all these things working together. And now then you see that Iran is being much more public and boisterous in ways that they haven't been in a long time. And there was an analyst a couple of days ago that was talking about some of the reasons why Iran is this way. And I'm going to show you what he had to say. And then I'm going to give you, and he didn't even know at the time he made this comment, but then the Iranian foreign minister just put a real exclamation point on it. And I want to ask you on the backside of this, how much does that complicate our situation? Now, first of all, let's see Kareem in his comment.
Iran is oftentimes a pretty good judge of U.S. resolve. And so the fact that they are publicly claiming credit for attacks on U.S. outposts in the region probably means that they don't fear conflict with the United States, because they know this is a Biden administration which is intent on trying to de-escalate and avert conflicts in the region. And in some ways, that emboldens Iran.
And then, almost as if on cue, we had the Iranian foreign minister who said this.
The United States should not, Mr. Biden should not, tie their destiny to the fate of Netanyahu. The full-scale cooperation of Biden and the White House with thugs like Netanyahu in Israel is the root of insecurity in the region. President Biden should immediately abandon his full support for this genocide of the Palestinians and the killing of more than 13,500 Palestinian children. We respect the American people. But thousands of years ago, when a country called the United States did not exist on the map of the globe, one of the greatest human civilization existed today, where Yemen is.
Man, I can't even remember the last time, Jason, I saw an Iranian leader publicly, first of all, that they publicly took credit for what happened in that strike that they were referring to there. And then second, that they go out there and just, lecture us, whatever, in the middle of this issues. Of course, they've always said death to America, so they've said a lot of those things. But now then they're being much more bold and audacious about it in coming out in the front here. And that's, I think, because they don't fear us and they don't respect us either. And I think that because they're looking around at the global situation here, and look, we can't take this conversation any further without looking at the elephant in the room, and that is with the Israel and the Palestine situation and our support of that, almost in contradiction to what the 95% of the rest of the world is doing. And I think that this is what the bigger reason is, that it's given Iran a lot of this audacity to say these things, because they see that they are not just them against the world anymore, or them against the United States, but now that a lot of the world is starting to be on their side. And that is, of course, I'm talking about this South African move to try to accuse Israel of apartheid and all of those awful things that are in part of that IJC movement right now. And a lot of people in the world are agreeing with that. And so when they see that the United States is nearly alone in like vetoing some of these things when they come to the United Nations, UNSC, or hundreds of countries around the world are voting in opposite to the United States, that gives them more boldness. So it's not just, as Keene says, that we're just not hitting Iran hard enough. So if we just punch them a little bit harder, things are going to get better, because and I think you mentioned this a second ago, they get it. They understand that there's consequences and results of their actions, and they expect to be hit. But I think that they're calculating that on the global domestic diplomatic scene and on the military scene, that things are in their favor, because we do keep saying, oh, we don't want a war. We don't want a war. We don't want to escalate. So I think that we're putting ourselves in a bind here, don't you?
Yeah, these are really relevant, but also very extremely, let's call them cautious but great points. That number one, Iran sees that even when we hit or strike them, this actually plays into their global, their statecraft, which is to dominate their people. They don't really care about the life of the everyday Iranian walking around. They're really about proxy power and hegemony in the region, the big guy on the block. So if we were to lob missiles at Iran, this feeds into their narrative that they use this narrative in the 1979 taking of our embassy, and then the revolution to oust our United States puppet and install the Khomeini rebellion. And of course, they're still into that. So that is important. And what the analyst Kareem laid out was also important. Yes, Iran has not seen that the United States is a power at this point in their history, their stage, to be fearful of coming out and giving the United States president an ultimatum. That should demonstrate the American people how far off our leadership has been. Because if you're willing to stand up and do that in the international realm, you have to understand exactly what you're dealing with. And then he threatens us with this global presence. They've been around for thousands of years. That's their way of really investing in the idea that Persia is this empire, and that's who you're dealing with, right? So for the United States to be coy, to try to be clever, to push for these deals, to negotiate leverage, to drop pallets of cash on the Iranians, whether it's in one presidency or another, or try to negotiate back into some deals that are favorable to Iran, demonstrates what every kid, every parent knows in America, which is if you let your children talk back to you and run amok, they're going to run amok. I mean, what we get is, we should expect this when we have an attitude or a disposition that we've been on display with for a while. Don't forget, Iranians took our sailors hostage in 2015 and had them on their knees, holding our United States Navy sailors under threat of violence. And we still see that this has been a game that's been a long time playing. The problem is, when our leadership is soft, or when we are trying to leverage negotiation or trying to strike peace with these enemies, we're always going to be in a position where they take advantage, and that's what we're seeing now.
So it sounds to me, it seems to me rather, we're in a situation to where, from a certain perspective, and I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, Keene seems like he does have a point that if you can't go with these little pinprick strikes. You got to hit them and hit them hard if you want to get their attention. Yet simultaneously, we don't want to get into a situation where we get into a war, because that would be enormously bad for the United States. And it almost then seems like your choices either go in hard and heavy and risk escalation into a war, or trim your sails and say, all right, we just need to cut off the bleeding here and live to fight another day. And maybe down the road we can get things back in order. So let's just keep this thing from exploding, basically. And of course, Iran will crow left and right about that. And people around the world will see that, we're weak, and that, we're not the America of old. And that can have unintended consequences as well. So we are truly in a damned if you do and a damned if you don't, but we can't just do nothing. We can't just do the same thing we are right now and think that that's going to go well too. So we're back to the original question. What do you recommend that the United States do right now, given all of this wreckage we're talking about that exists?
So we look at the third option, which I think, again, puts us in a different role than having to either go hard and heavy and all in on war, or sit back and do nothing. The third option is a little more clever, and it takes a little bit more diplomacy and leverage. But you got to sidle up to the table of the important players. Like, if we go back to that spider web analogy, and the anchors of the web are in places like Beijing and Moscow, well, guess where you need to put pressure on? Beijing and Moscow. And it's not just those two, but we're using them as sort of the examples. You got Turkey, you've got other players in the region, and there's plenty of ways to pull on the threads and walk around to your enemies' enemies, or at least their let's call them cool allies, if you will, and place the leverage you need on them. Right? What can you do in that realm? I'm not saying that that's easy, but this is like going to your doctor after being obese and saying, hey, I want to get healthy and I want a six-pack ab. What can I do to get that tomorrow? And the answer is like, well, nothing. But you can make a decision to be healthy today and begin that process. So our leadership, our White House, has to have a coordinated unity of effort. And let me paint one more problem that I think the audience should be aware of. The big challenge here, when we talk about grand strategy that Ben Hodges, General Hodges, and I'm sure General Keene are both aware of, the problem with grand strategy is it really comes and stems from the people. What do the people believe? What does the American constituent believe? And when we are at war with ourselves and we are confused about who we are as a people, what do we believe as a culture, as a faith, as a people, as a nation is in our best interest, and why do we believe that? And we're vexed. We're conflicted over that. And I think the biggest problem is translating a unified idea or ideation of who we are as a people allows, if we could do that, it would allow our leadership to work into these situations with a unified sort of idea. But they don't have that. We're chaotic. We don't quite understand our heart. By the way, that is what the Iranian representative is saying. We watched America. This is what the Chinese have saying. This is what the Russians have said. We are watching your culture erode at the fabric and the core of the American street, we'll call it. And when we're at war with ourselves, it's very hard to meddle in other people's wars. So we're doing it a little bit chaotically, and everyone knows it. They're getting away with the United States, let's call it insecurity in our body politic that has not communicated what is our big vision. That's why we didn't have an end result in Iraq. That's why we never had the clear objective in Afghanistan, because there are not people in the American street, Wisconsin, Iowa, farmers, Ohioans, people that are working for wages and feeding their family. They shouldn't have to run out and get a PhD to try to understand how to untangle the Middle East. What they should be saying to our leaders is, this is what we're okay with. And if you're going to spend our national treasure, blood, money on something, this is how important it should be. When we don't stress that, these leaders get away with chaos. And here's a nice clue, right? Monday night in Iowa was a chance to do this. How do you hold your representatives or those running for office accountable? New Hampshire is another one. South Carolina is another one. If you really want to get to the answers of why our foreign policy is such a mess, ask these questions, make them hard. And if you're getting general answers back, like, we just need to hit them harder, that's not an answer. I went to war. I was in the service for 22 years. We know how to hit get our enemies. The military is completely successful if you give us a mission. But that's got nothing to do with whether that mission has a strategy that the entire nation can get behind, that has an outcome and an endpoint that is somehow effective for the prosperity of those people in Wisconsin and Ohio. So again, it's
Yeah.
tied together. I always like to connect the dots back down to what do the people in the seats need to think? Like, hey, this is your chance to actually say, what are we doing there and why?
And one of the things that I'd say along to just drives me crazy, as anybody who watches our show can see, is that there is so little vision among our politicians and our leaders, whether it's the Pentagon, State Department, Defense Department, or the White House, that they don't lay out a vision. I don't know for sure what y'all even want to accomplish or what you think. I mean, it seems like that our so-called vision is just, I want to be able to tell for Israel to do whatever it wants and to support them without question. And I want Iran to not do anything. And I want the Houthis to not do anything. And I don't want it to cost me anything. And I want to have all of that at the same time. Okay, that's an aspiration. That's like a Santa Claus wish list. It's not
Right.
reality. And
Right.
until we start to say this is a messy, chaotic world where there are people who are working against our interest, and we have to try to figure out how to get our interest at the lowest cost and an acceptable outcome. And here's the path to get there. That's you can have a strategy. That's something that the people in Iowa, Wisconsin, and South Carolina, they can get that. They don't need a PhD. They just need
Right.
somebody to talk to them and say, here's our vision. So they can say either yes, nah, or no. I don't want that. But right now, there's neither of those things. And we don't even know what we're trying to accomplish other than giving Santa Claus his wish list.
That's right. That's precisely right. That's why it becomes an emotional reaction at every response. So when we see something happen internationally,
Great
we're
point.
stuck as the body politic emotionally reacting. Well, let's get back at them somehow. What changes that is not being reactive but proactive by thinking through, as you said, what is the policy up front and the vision, so that we know when Hamas does this or Iran does that, how does that match with what we believe in general? Like, is this the right time, and are these points the right ones? Pressure that for the outcome that we've all agreed on. Now, I want to give politicians a little defense here, so they're not entirely in the hot seat. We change our body politic every 2 years, or we have the opportunity to change it. So it's very hard for the United States. Our founders saw that, to have a national grand strategy that carries from year to year to year. That's very hard, but they gave us an option which said something like, as long as you can't define that well, then stay out of meddling in people's business. That's what they said. Now, so the problem is not so much that we can't define one, because that's almost purposeful in our Constitution. The problem is, how much are you attempting to meddle, and the influence that we hold, the actual influence through the purse strings, is at the level of Congress. If you really want to change something over there, hold off the checks. I mean, you're writing checks like a drunken sailor. And as long as you're writing checks, man, nobody's going to change their attitudes. So
100%.
you've got a choice there, but I'll
Or if
be
you're writing,
damned.
put some damn strings on it, man.
That's it, right?
Don't just
Put
say,
some
here, have
strings
some
on
money.
it. That's right. Put some strings on it. And boy, do they get upset when we talk about putting strings on the money or having accountability, because honestly, that's work. That means they have to oversight, they have to sit down, they have to ask questions. And when you ask questions to an agency, what are the answers you're going to get back? They're a little bit obfuscation. They're a little bit, there's some honesty wrapped in like policy and bureaucracy and wonk, and nobody wants it. It's very boring. So for the American person, sitting out there wondering, how do we get this change? The answer is, look, if you don't know what's happening with the money, then cut it short, or give less of it. In other words, the answer is not just to cut everybody off, but my point is, if you don't come up with accountability, transparency, then you don't deserve to spend my money. It's my money.
I agree,
So
100% with that. Exactly right. So let me ask you this in our last few minutes here. I love that analogy you had a minute ago of, there's somebody who's like 150 pounds overweight and they want to get back and get those six packs, abs and stuff. So that's going to take some time. But what we have an issue right now on our table. What should we do to Iran if they continue to get more bold and start hitting, more of our assets in here? What do we do right now to keep this from getting into a war from which we may not be able to extract ourselves without great cost?
we really have to find a way to hurt them in a way that is effective. And again, a lot of that's going to run through Beijing and Moscow. And if they have no influence in Beijing or Moscow, then it's going to be limited how much we can do with Iran without doing a full blown hammer solution. And again, nobody wants that. Nobody's even promoting that. What they're promoting is rather than a hammer, let's do a drip, drip, drip kind of like violence of action on a sort of a monthly or quarterly basis, and that just looks miserable. But I suspect that we have a little ways to go before building up capital in places like Beijing and Moscow. And while we're
That's
while
probably
we're
an understatement.
that could be an understatement. While we're sort of in this abeyance type of period, I will just say we don't have a lot of choices here. So it's going to look like what both the generals and Wes Clark also said this, it's a tit for tat, and you're going to see sort of ratcheting up and escalation. That's going to happen. The one I'll tell you, you want to know the bright shining spot here? There's a
Oh, I'd
bright
love to see something. Give me some kind of a bright spot.
all right. All right. For years now, we haven't had the naval conversation. The naval conversation has been missing in action, right? The poor Navy chiefs trying to get ships and trying to ensure that the United States remains a naval power has been a real lost conversation, but it's one that's desperately needed. And if nothing else, the threatening of commerce on the Red Sea is all about shipping. It's all about naval power and projection of power that doesn't rely on military forces investing in 20 years of campaigning on the ground. So this is at least sharpening the conversation in Congress and the debate with the strategic thinkers that we really need good flexible naval options. I'm not saying we're close, but not even having that conversation for the last 20 years has been a gap that perhaps gets strengthened as we start to realize to really increase our prowess and our ability to affect things on waterways and commerce across the globe. We have to be smarter about the naval projection than we've been. That's about shipbuilding. It's about our industry. It's about, recruitment. It's about how to affect a positive Navy solution. So at least that conversation is happening. It wouldn't even be happening if we weren't in this situation. So there's the bright side.
Well, let's hope we can get there. We'll actually have to have you back here very soon to talk more specifically about that. I'd love to hear more about your ideas about what that might look like, and again, the whole pros and cons about that. But we'll leave it there for the moment, and we're going to keep a very close eye on this situation as it continues to develop. Thanks for coming on today, Jason. This has been a very illuminating conversation, as they always are when we have you on. We're very grateful for having you on. Thanks for being here.
You're a champion, and again, I look forward to the next super easy topic that you decide to hit out there with. So,
yeah, I'll think in the future if I could do something to make it at least challenging for you. I don't want to give you all these softballs, but
oh man, God bless you for what you're doing.
You bet. Thanks, and we'll see you, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Remember to like and subscribe and pass along, because folks, we're just giving you stuff that you just don't get anywhere else, this level of understanding, so that you truly understand what's at stake. And when you just hear these comments about, yeah, let's bomb them, let's do this, they're never as easy as that. There's always potential consequences. We're going to remain unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you what those risks are, so that you can be a person that one of those informed citizens, so that you will know and be able to keep our leaders feet to the fire and accountable for what they're doing or not doing. We thank you for being here, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.